The story begins not with celebration, but with silence. Imagine this: a woman sits at her dining table. She has worked all day, managed her children's homework, and still prepared her husband's favorite meal. The table is set, candles flickering, not because it's a special occasion, but because she believes every day should carry dignity. Then the door opens. He steps inside, not alone, but with another woman beside him, pregnant, her belly rounded with life that is not her own. For a moment, time fractures. The wife's fork falls against the porcelain plate, the sound echoing louder than thunder in her chest. Her husband does not look ashamed. He does not whisper. He does not explain. He introduces the mistress, his mistress, as though she were a business partner, as though fidelity, sacrifice, and covenant were small things to discard. This is where many stories end, in devastation, betrayal, and quiet collapse. But not this one. Because this woman, the wife, though cracked by shock, did not shatter. She did not lash out. She did not sink into the despair that tried to swallow her whole. Instead, she breathed, and in that breath lay the seed of transformation. She didn't know it yet, but this single betrayal was about to unlock a hidden strength, a strategy so profound that it would reverse everything he thought he had secured. The question is, when a woman gives everything, and betrayal comes knocking with no apology, what does justice look like? And more importantly, what does karma do when arrogance believes it has already won? This is the story of a woman sit's quiet power. Of humiliation turned into a weapon. Of betrayal reborn as strategy. Stay with me, because by the time this story closes, you will not only see how she answered his cruelty, but also how she built a legacy that no betrayal could erase. Before betrayal ever enters the room, there is usually a foundation of trust, and her trust began decades earlier. She grew up in a household where resilience was the only inheritance. Her mother worked 2 jobs, often coming home after midnight, hands aching, back bent. Her father was present but exhausted, worn down by a system that paid him less and expected more. From them she learned sacrifice was survival, and commitment was a duty, not a choice. So when she met him, her future husband, she thought she had found the one place where loyalty would finally be reciprocated. He was ambitious, charismatic, and spoke to her as if she were not just a woman, but a partner in building an empire. They married young, with little more than hope and determination. But here's where the imbalance began. She worked sometimes 2, sometimes 3 jobs while also finishing her degree at night. Every paycheck she earned went into their shared dream. His business idea? She believed in him so deeply that she carried both the financial and emotional weight of their household, while he experimented, failed, and tried again. It was not weakness that drove her, it was vision. She believed if she just poured enough, one day the well would overflow for both of them, and for a while it seemed she was right. His small ventures began to flourish. Their home improved, their children had stability. Outwardly they looked like a rising black power couple. But inside cracks were forming. He had grown accustomed to her sacrifice. He no longer saw her efforts as extraordinary, just expected. A dynamic rooted not in mutual respect, but in entitlement. And beneath that entitlement lay something deeper, a cultural narrative too often imposed on black women, that they must be endlessly strong, endlessly giving, endlessly forgiving. Society had trained him, subtly and persistently, to believe her sacrifices were natural, even owed. This is how betrayal brews, not suddenly, but through years of imbalance. Through every moment she suppressed her exhaustion to protect his pride, through every time she covered his debts with her earnings, through every late night when she prayed for his dreams more than she prayed for her own. By the time he walked through that door with another woman at his side, the betrayal was not just personal, it was systemic. He was not simply breaking a vow, he was exploiting a structure of loyalty that had never been equal. Here's what that moment teaches us. Betrayal rarely begins at the scene of discovery. It begins long before, in the quiet allowances we make, the unbalanced scales we ignore, the cultural scripts we unconsciously obey. And yet, while he mistook her patience for weakness, he had overlooked the reservoir of intelligence she carried. What he believed was compliance was actually strategy waiting to be awakened. She didn't know it yet, but her years of sacrifice had sharpened skills far more powerful than his arrogance: financial wisdom, emotional control, and the art of endurance. And soon, those very qualities would become the instruments of his undoing. The night he brought the mistress into their home, silence weighed heavier than rage. She sat, spine straight, face calm, though inside her chest a storm roared. Her children had already gone upstairs. That spared them for now from seeing the humiliation, but she knew children can sense what parents try to hide, and what they sensed tonight would shape the way they trusted tomorrow. This was the fork in the road. On one side, collapse. She could break down, scream, demand explanations that would only cut her deeper. She could leave immediately, but leaving without preparation would mean abandoning the very stability she had spent decades constructing. Rage was tempting, but rage burns everything, including the one holding the fire. On the other side, silence. A colder silence than he expected. Not surrender, but calculation. If she remained composed, she could choose her next steps deliberately, not reactively. Here's what that moment teaches us. When betrayal strikes, our first instinct is often to act fast, to reclaim power instantly. But true power is not in speed, it is in direction. So she waited. That night, while he slept soundly beside his mistress in the guest room, an insult designed to provoke her, she stared at the ceiling, breathing slowly. She reviewed every sacrifice she had made, every dollar she had invested, every connection she had nurtured on his behalf. And in that stillness, she realized something. He thought he held all the leverage, because he had taken her loyalty for granted. But his empire, his reputation, his entire stability rested on her quiet labor. If she collapsed, he won. If she calculated, he risked losing everything. A single action could flip the entire outcome. She didn't know the exact plan yet, but she knew the shape of it. Patience, precision, strategy. So when morning came, she did not confront him with shouting. She served breakfast as though nothing had changed. He smirked at her composure, believing it was weakness. What he didn't know was that his arrogance had already opened the door for his downfall. Because while he was celebrating conquest, she was preparing something far greater, the quiet architecture of karma. To the untrained eye, she seemed passive in those first weeks. She cooked, she cleaned, she carried on. The children went to school, the house stayed in order, and her husband, growing bolder by the day, believed her silence confirmed his dominance. But beneath the surface, she was moving differently. Every night, when the house fell quiet, she opened her laptop, not to scroll but to study. She reviewed financial accounts, tracing every wire, every deposit, every business transaction. Years of supporting his ventures had given her access to details he assumed she never noticed. But she always had. Here's what he missed. While he was the face of their growing business, she was the spine. She had managed the books when money was scarce, negotiated payment plans with creditors, and learned the legal fine print of contracts, because failure was never an option. And those skills, the ones he dismissed as helping out, were actually mastery. She didn't know it yet, but her endurance had been training. Her sacrifices had sharpened 3 hidden powers. Financial intelligence. She knew exactly where the leverage points in his empire were, and how fragile they actually were. Social capital. The community, the church, the local investors, most trusted her more than him. Quietly they had seen who truly held things together. Emotional discipline. Betrayal can provoke chaos, but she had learned to breathe through chaos. That calm was her greatest weapon. And then came her first small reversal of power. One evening, he returned home boasting about a new investor he had landed. She smiled politely, but later that night she made a single phone call to an older mentor who had once advised them both. Calmly, she explained just enough of the truth. Not gossip, not rage, just facts. The mentor listened, went silent, and then replied, "I see, let me handle this." Within days, the investor who had promised funding pulled back, citing concerns about stability. He never connected the dots, but she did. Here's what that moment teaches us. Real power often hides in plain sight. What looks like compliance is sometimes observation. What looks like weakness can be a mask for strategy. Her husband thought she was tolerating betrayal. In reality, she was charting its cost. And while he continued parading his mistress, she was quietly stacking her evidence, her alliances, and her plan. Because when the moment came to move, she would not strike in anger, she would strike in precision. And that precision would bring him to his knees. Power rarely shifts without resistance, and in her case, the world seemed to conspire to break her resolve. The first blow came from her own community. Word spread quickly, whispers that her husband had moved on, that his mistress was expecting, that she was the bitter wife who couldn't keep her man. People didn't ask for her side, they assumed they already knew the story. This is how betrayal compounds itself. The act is private, but the shame becomes public. At church, women who once admired her now avoided her eyes. Men emboldened by her husband's arrogance spoke to her with pity, as if she were already erased. Even her children, though she shielded them, heard enough from classmates to come home with questions that pierced deeper than knives. "Mom, why does Dad love her more?" That night, she cried in the shower, water running so hot it burned her skin. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was humiliation. For a brief moment she wondered if collapse might be easier, if leaving with nothing might cost less than carrying the weight of his betrayal, plus the community's judgment. And then came the second blow, financial pressure. He began to redirect funds, shifting assets out of their joint accounts, into new ventures under his mistress's name. Suddenly bills that had always been covered, began to stack. Creditors called, the children's tuition payment bounced for the first time ever. It was a public crack. People noticed, whispers grew louder, even her closest friend asked gently if maybe it was time to accept the new reality and let go. Here's the breaking point. She was invited to a community fundraiser, a place she had always been welcomed as a leader, but this time, when she walked in, eyes turned cold. Her husband arrived moments later, hand in hand with the pregnant mistress, presenting her as if she were the new queen. Applause followed them. Cameras flashed. And for the first time, her composure faltered. She felt heat rise to her face, her throat tighten, her body tremble. She excused herself, stepping into the bathroom, gripping the sink so tightly her knuckles whitened. She looked into the mirror, and for a moment she didn't recognize herself. This was the breaking point. The moment humiliation threatened to turn to despair. Here's what that moment teaches us. Every transformation demands a collapse, not a permanent one, but a moment where the old identity disintegrates. Before the phoenix rises, it must burn. And in that bathroom, staring at her reflection through tears, she whispered the words she didn't yet believe, but needed to say out loud. This is not where my story ends. She didn't know it yet, but that small defiance, those 6 words would be the spark that changed everything. Because while he celebrated publicly, her resolve was quietly hardening. And soon she would discover the turning point that would set karma into motion. That night, after the fundraiser humiliation, she came home alone. Her husband and the mistress had stayed behind, enjoying the spotlight. She entered a quiet house. The children were asleep. The bills were stacked on the counter. Her chest still carried the weight of the eyes that had judged her, the applause that had erased her. She sat in the dark, head bowed, and for the first time she allowed herself to pray, not for him but for herself. God, she whispered, show me how to stand again. And the answer did not come as thunder or lightning, it came as memory. She remembered her mother, hands raw from scrubbing, eyes weary from labor, who once told her, they can strip you of comfort, but they can strip you of wisdom, and wisdom builds again. Something inside her clicked. Here's what that moment teaches us. Transformation is rarely about finding new strength. It is about remembering the strength you already carry. So she began to plan. The first step was internal. She made a vow that she would no longer live reactively, no more chasing his chaos, no more crying over his choices. Instead, she would operate with discipline, calm, strategic, deliberate. The second step was tactical. She reached out quietly to her network, old professors, church elders, even women she once mentored, not with gossip, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I need opportunities. I need advice. And because her reputation had always been one of integrity, people listened. Doors began to open. The third step was protective. She met with a lawyer, calmly, methodically. She requested copies of every financial record, every deed, every investment contract. She didn't file for divorce yet. She simply gathered knowledge, because knowledge, in this war, was armor. She didn't know it yet, but she was building the blueprint of her comeback. Meanwhile, her husband misread her silence. He thought she was finally defeated. He boasted louder, spent recklessly, flaunted his mistress more brazenly. Every display of arrogance only deepened his blindness. But she had shifted. She was no longer the woman clinging to loyalty. She was now the architect of her own redemption. A single action had flipped the trajectory, no longer a victim of betrayal, but a strategist of transformation. And as she sketched her quiet plan, one truth burned steady in her chest. Karma doesn't rush, it arrives right on time. Her plan did not begin with fireworks. It began with whispers, with paperwork, with silence so steady it unnerved those who thought she was broken. Each morning, she carried on with routine. She greeted her children with warmth, sent them off to school, and kept the house in order. Outwardly nothing had changed. Inwardly everything had. The first move was financial. She opened her own accounts, separate, secure, in a bank he had no ties to. Into these accounts, she funneled small sums, refunds, freelance income, even quiet gifts from friends who respected her journey. To him these amounts seemed trivial. To her they were seeds. The second move was professional. She accepted a position with a local nonprofit that valued her skills in finance and organization. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her two things: a steady income and a platform to rebuild her credibility, independent of his shadow. Within weeks, she impressed leadership with her efficiency. Soon she was entrusted with bigger responsibilities. The third move was legal. Quietly, her lawyer helped her map every asset tied to their marriage, properties, investments, even offshore accounts. She learned which assets could be frozen, which contracts could be challenged, which debts he had concealed. She documented everything meticulously. Her patience became her weapon. And yet, the most powerful move was emotional. She stopped seeking validation from him. The more he flaunted his mistress, the less she reacted. Her silence became unsettling. He tried provoking her, loud arguments, public humiliation, but she didn't bite. she responded with calm so cutting it unsettled his certainty. Here's what that moment teaches us. True execution is not about dramatic displays, it's about consistency. Quiet steps, repeated daily, shift entire landscapes. And her quiet steps were already shifting his world. His investors began to notice his recklessness. His business partners, many of whom trusted her more than him, started calling her privately, asking questions, expressing doubts. She gave no gossip, no bitterness, just facts. And the facts spoke louder than his bravado. Meanwhile at home, her children noticed something too. Their mother was calmer, steadier, she smiled more. Not the forced smile of survival, but the quiet smile of someone holding a secret victory. That stability became their anchor, even as rumors swirled outside. It was a silent climb. No one applauded yet, no one suspected the scale of her preparation. But the higher she climbed in silence, the steeper his fall would be when the tables turned. Because karma was patient. And karma was moving. It happened on a night he thought was his greatest triumph. A gala, black tie, cameras flashing. He arrived in a custom suit, Mistress on his arm, her belly rounder now, his pride swelling with every step. He had told himself this was the final erasure of his wife, the proof that she was nothing but a shadow in his story. But shadows can shift, and on this night, they consumed him. She entered the room minutes after him, dressed not extravagantly, but elegantly. A long black gown, her posture regal, her presence quiet, yet commanding. Conversations hushed as she walked in. Not out of pity, but recognition. Something in her demeanor had changed. He smirked, certain she had come to beg, or perhaps to embarrass herself with tears. What he didn't know was that the stage had already been set by her, not him. Halfway through the evening, as donors mingled and speeches began, the host announced a surprise, an award for financial integrity and community leadership. Her name was called. Applause erupted. He froze. She stepped onto the stage, calm, radiant. She accepted the award, and then without notes, without trembling, spoke with clarity. For years I believed sacrifice meant giving until there was nothing left, but I've learned that true sacrifice must build, not destroy. Tonight, I stand not as someone erased by betrayal, but as someone reborn by truth. And truth, she paused, letting her eyes meet his across the room, always reveals itself. The audience erupted in applause, not polite, but thunderous, not for him, but for her. Cameras flashed, investors nodded, whispers spread like wildfire. And then the second blow landed. Because while the applause still echoed, his phone buzzed. 1, 2, 3 notifications. News outlets were already reporting what she had prepared with her lawyer, legal filings, asset freezes, and a public disclosure of financial misconduct. She hadn't just taken the stage symbolically, she had taken the ground out from under him legally and financially. He stumbled, excused himself, tried to leave quietly, but eyes followed him now, not with admiration but suspicion. His mistress clung to his arm, but the glow around them had vanished. Here's what that moment teaches us. Power is not reclaimed in noise, but in precision. A single well-timed revelation can silence years of arrogance. That night, the public tables turned. He entered as the conqueror, he left as the cautionary tale. And she walked out not just applauded but recognized for her strength, her intelligence, her dignity. The empire he built on arrogance had cracked, and the woman he dismissed as weak was now the architect of his undoing. But the story wasn't over, because when empires fall the dust settles differently for everyone, the villain, the bystanders, and the one who finally stood tall. In the weeks after the gala, his world unraveled quickly. The investors who once rushed to shake his hand now avoided his calls. Contracts dissolved, properties he had hidden under his mistress's name were frozen by court order. Creditors, emboldened by public exposure, demanded repayment. The empire he boasted about stood on legs of clay, and once the facade cracked, collapse was swift. The mistress, who once basked in his promises, began to feel the weight of reality. No more luxury gifts, no more fine dining, no more whispers of security. She watched as stress hollowed him, as arrogance curdled into desperation. Within months the glow that surrounded their affair dimmed to bitterness. But the wife, the woman who had endured it all, was rebuilding differently. Her nonprofit work flourished, donations surged after the gala, and she was invited to join the board. Community members who had once pitied her now sought her guidance. Even women who had whispered behind her back approached her privately, apologizing, admitting they had underestimated her strength. She accepted their words with grace, but never forgot the lesson. Respect built on performance is fragile. Respect built on integrity endures. At home, her children saw the transformation too. No longer did they ask why their father loved someone else. Instead, they said things like, "Mom, you served the strongest person I know. Mom, when I grow up, I want to be like you." And in those moments, she understood the true victory. It wasn't the frozen accounts, the public humiliation, or even the applause at the gala. It was the quiet inheritance she had secured for her children, the belief that dignity, intelligence, and patience carry more power than betrayal ever could. Here's what that moment teaches us. Redemption isn't about erasing pain, it's about transforming it into something that shapes the future for the better. Her husband? He became a cautionary tale, not destroyed, but diminished, forced to rebuild from scraps, his reputation forever stained by arrogance and betrayal. Her? She became more than a survivor, she became a symbol, a living reminder that when betrayal tries to silence you, patience and strategy can turn that silence into thunder. And yet, even in victory she carried one truth carefully: revenge had never been her goal, justice was, and justice had been served. The community shifted. People looked at her not as a woman left behind, but as a woman who walked forward on her own terms. And that ripple effect inspired others, wives, daughters, even men, to reconsider how they handled betrayal, power, and dignity. The dust had settled. The story of her humiliation had become the story of her transformation. But stories don't end at redemption. They continue as legacies. And hers was just beginning. Years later, when people spoke of her, they didn't speak first of betrayal. They spoke of strategy. They spoke of dignity. They spoke of how she turned silence into strength and humiliation into a platform. She built a legacy not by erasing her scars, but by showing that scars can be blueprints. Her nonprofit grew into a regional force, offering financial literacy, career training and mentorship for women who felt trapped in cycles of dependence. Each workshop carried her imprint: calm, intelligent, grounded, quietly powerful. And her children? They thrived. Not because they never saw brokenness, but because they saw how brokenness can be rebuilt into something stronger. They learned that betrayal doesn't define you, response does. Her husband's story, meanwhile, became a cautionary parable. Some pitied him, others dismissed him, but no one admired him. He had mistaken arrogance for power and entitlement for love, and karma had written the final chapter of his empire. Here's what that moment teaches us. Legacy is not built on what is done to you, it is built on what you choose to do after. She didn't just win. She transformed the very narrative. No longer the silent, long-suffering wife, she became the professor, the strategist, the mentor to others walking through fire. And as I tell you her story, I ask you this. Where in your own life have you mistaken endurance for weakness? Where have you underestimated the quiet power you already carry? And what might change if you shifted from reacting in pain to responding with precision? Because betrayal will come, in one form or another. Systems will test you, people will underestimate you, but as her story shows, you don't have to collapse under it, you can rise through it. A single action can flip the entire outcome. So if this story resonated with your values, if you saw yourself, your mother, your sister, your daughter, your brother, then don't let it stop here. Share it, speak on it, build with it. Because every story like this becomes a seed, and every seed in time becomes a forest of resilience. This is her legacy. It can be yours too. Hit the like, comment, and subscribe if this story spoke to you. Together we build not just audiences, but communities of strength.